Right. To round off the afternoon, then, what I wanted to do was go through DFG decision making, and it's been mentioned a couple of times today, but just wanted to go through with you how you'd make a robust DFG decision, because what things that we often get asked are, can I give a DFG for this? Can I give a DFG for that? And it's kind of really difficult to say just based on that kind of thing. The existence of mandatory grants is extremely rare, and that rarity illustrates that the mindset of the decision-making authority must not be to search for grounds to refuse the grant, but in good faith to limit examination to the relevant matters. So this was from a case which I'll be talking about in a few minutes' time. But basically what the judge said was mandatory grants are very precious, and if you possibly can, you should be trying to say yes. But sometimes you do have to say no, because not everything somebody applies for is going to be relevant for a DFG. So I'm going to go through a little bit of case law, looking at how to make a decision on your DFGs. And this was the first case, which I called Should I Stay or Should I Go, which was a case from Islington in London. This isn't the actual property, but I've been told it looks fairly similar to the property involved. And it involved a Mrs. McEwen, who was an amputee, leg amputee, and she needed to get in and out of this kind of property down these steps that you can see on the screen here. And her sons were kind of carrying her up and down in a wheelchair to get her in and out of the property. And she applied to Islington Council for a grant to construct a pad and have a platform lift installed on the kind of the edge of the pavement here, so she could then get up and down from the pavement into the property itself. And Islington refused the grant application. So what Islington said was, when Mrs. McEwen applied for this grant, was that, and she's a council tenant, and they said that there are alternative properties available that Mrs. McEwen can move to. I think it was all about a mile or so away. They said it wasn't reasonable and practicable to provide the lift, partly because of the cost of it. And they also said that the rest of the property wouldn't be suitable, that kind of access to the bedroom and the bathroom, actually, once you got inside the property, was still going to be quite problematic. So they refused the grant on that basis. And Mrs. McEwen then applied for judicial review. So kind of the first issue was, well, can you refuse to adapt and suggest a move instead? And what the judge said was, well, it's definitely good practice to have that conversation and to look at the alternatives that may be a better outcome for people. But you can't refuse a valid DFG application just because you, as the local authority, think that there is a better option out there if the applicant disagrees. That's from a DFG perspective. What unfortunately Islington didn't test was whether, as a social landlord, they could withhold permissions for the adaptations, as they believe it's not best use of their stock. Islington didn't mention that in the case, but clearly what the judge said was that from a DFG perspective, and in this case Islington was both the DFG decision maker and the landlord, was that from a DFG perspective, you can't refuse a grant just because you think there's somewhere better that somebody can move to. And then they started looking at the eligible works, and particularly the bit about reasonable and practicable. And hopefully you already know, I'll go through in a minute, that there are kind of two stages to a DFG test for eligible works. First is, do the works meet the purposes, which I will go through in a second, which is a fairly objective assessment. And then, are those works necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable, which is a bit more subjective, which always depends on the individual circumstances. So you do have to follow this process if you're going to make a robust decision. what we've come up with is this kind of diagram to hopefully try and explain to you how it works. So across the top there, we have the 12 purposes for which a grant must be approved. So things like access to the home, access to a bath, access to a wash basin, through to better heating and cooking, making the home safer, and access to the garden. So for a grant to be approved, or for works to be approved for a grant, the adaptations you're proposing must meet one of those purposes. Then you look at whether it's necessary and appropriate, reasonable and practicable, and if it all is, then you get your eligible works. Your proposed works turns into your eligible work. So for this case, we had proposed works of a step lift, and I've used a basketball analogy here. So proposed step lift, does it meet the purpose of providing access to the home? I think based on fairly straightforward assessment of that, a step lift meets the purpose of being access to a home. So usually that purpose bit's a slam dunk. That's the basketball analogy for you. But then, in this case, is the step lift then necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable? And if you remember, Islington said it wasn't reasonable and practicable. But in terms of this case, and this was one of the key points of this case, what the judge said was that when you're assessing necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable, you can only take into account things associated with the purpose that you're examining. So in this case, when you're assessing whether it's necessary and appropriate, reasonable and practicable, in terms of access to the home, you can't consider access to the shower, can't consider access to the toilet, can't consider access to the bedroom when you're making this decision. So when Islington said that the rest of the home wasn't suitable for her in terms of access to those facilities, the judge said that didn't matter. You can only judge necessary and appropriate, reasonable and practicable in relation to the particular purpose that you're looking at. And in this case, it was access to the home. So we'll come back to the reasonable and practical bit in a second when I've been through this second case. And this was from Redbridge, and it was a tale of two lifts. So it was an adult son who still lived with his parents, profoundly disabled, had a number of adaptations over the years, and had a through-floor lift to get access to his bedroom and shower room, which were on the first floor. Had a few through-floor lifts, and a few years ago one had broken down, they'd had it replaced, and the new one wasn't as reliable as previous ones, and a few times it had been broken down. And to get him back upstairs, they'd rolled him up in a duvet and kind of dragged him up the stairs to get him back to his bedroom and shower room, which obviously isn't very suitable. And what they'd asked for was a stair lift to act as a backup in any situations where the through-floor lift broke down in the future. So a health OT went in and did their assessment and said it was necessary and appropriate for a stair lift provided as a backup to the through-floor lift in case it breaks down. The application on that basis went to Redbridge Council, who refused the application from the Gulreses based on they said they can only provide one item of equipment, that's per purpose, and they've already had a through-floor lift to access the bedroom, so that's that one piece of equipment ticked off. They said that a warranty and service plan were a suitable alternative to the stair lift and be a provision in case of breakdown. And they said on that basis it wasn't reasonable and practicable to award a DFG for a stair lift. And the family applied for judicial review to challenge that decision. So again, this is kind of getting onto the crux of necessary and appropriate and reasonable and practicable in terms of deciding the eligible works. And this is directly from the legislation that the housing authority should look at whether they're satisfied that the relevant works, so in this case the stair lift, was necessary and appropriate and that it's reasonable and practical to carry out the works. But they didn't take into account this bit. So the reasonable and practical part of the test only has regard to the age and condition of the dwelling. So the dwelling in this case was perfectly satisfactory condition. So they couldn't say it wasn't reasonable and practical to carry out the works because there wasn't any issue with the age and condition of the dwelling. They'd accepted the Health OT's view that it was necessary and appropriate to have the stair lift. And so obviously their decision to not award the grant based on reasonable and practicable was found to be wrong. And so the judicial review was granted. So I think this, and I think this is fairly common held belief, that social care or the OT decides what is necessary and appropriate, and housing or the grants officer decides what's reasonable and practicable in terms of kind of common customer practice with DFGs. And what this case is clearly saying is that that's not correct. Where the decision making actually happens is that housing, it's kind of housing or the grants officer's decision on what is necessary and appropriate, and the OT or social care are the consultee in that process. And on the reasonable and practical element of the decision, in the vast majority of cases where the house isn't falling down, is pretty much irrelevant. So just bring me back to one of my hobby horses on why social services still do have panel meetings for DFGs, or panel meetings in any case. Actually, this is from the Care Act guidance, which said that panels shouldn't be used for routine decisions. And if you consider that social care is only a consultee on DFG, I don't see there's any reason why there should be panels for DFGs. You may have meetings around complex cases, but routine panels should be a thing of the past. So if reasonable and practicable isn't a key element of making a decision on what is appropriate to approve for a DFG, then we do need to think about necessary and appropriate a little bit more. So these are the guiding principles that came from some work that Francis Hayward did about 20 years ago, that we included in the DFG guidance that came out 2 years ago now. But what we felt was kind of on the basis of the Redbridge case that we needed to take this on another step. And for any occupational therapists that are watching, I'm sure you'll be aware of the person, environment, occupation PEO model, which not an OT, which I won't go on to explain, but we kind of looked at that and started to look at how we could use it to develop a more objective and useful assessment tool for what is necessary and appropriate for a DFG. Looking at things like bodily functions, roles and routines, values and beliefs, physical environment, economic issues, social and cultural issues, and things that are due to a disability, considering the alternatives and thinking in the long term. So that led us on to this framework in terms of how to make a decision on what is necessary and appropriate on any individual DFG application. And the intention with this isn't that it's a kind of tick box exercise. The idea with this is it gives you a range of kind of categories and considerations that you would think about when you're looking at whether an adaptation or application is necessary and appropriate. So looking at whether it's necessary due to disability, whether there are suitable alternatives that are available. As we saw with the earlier case, moving somewhere else may not necessarily be a reason to refuse a grant, but there may be other alternatives. So in the other case, providing a warranty and a service plan may be considered a suitable alternative and necessary and appropriate to providing that second lift. Looking whether it's long-term and a sustainable solution, so the third part of the necessary element. And then look at whether it's appropriate to the person in terms of body functions, roles and routines, values and beliefs, and whether it's appropriate to the environment or kind of property. So it's minimising barriers to independence in and around the home, reducing care costs, which is kind of the economic element, and that it will meet the social and cultural needs of the family. So, as I say, it's not designed to be a checkbox. It's a list of factors to be considered when you come to a judgment on these cases. So if we go back to the two cases we've looked at and kind of run through the decision-making process again, thinking about this, this new tool, I think in terms of the step lift, thinking about the considerations in terms of necessary and appropriate, I think you probably tick all of those boxes. It's a tick box exercise, but having a having a platform lift probably is necessary and appropriate based on that set of criteria. So proposed step lift is the slam dunk in terms of meeting access to the home. And then if we're solely looking at access to the home and we're considering necessary and appropriate, then the stair lift, the basketball, will then pass that test and go into your basket of eligible works.
Our survey said,
but still on the understanding that the landlord, in that case Islington, could have said no, it's not a suitable use of our stock, as the landlord potentially, but that wasn't covered in the case law. And then kind of thinking about the through floor lift stair lift case, I think kind of looking at suitable alternatives, probably the warranty and the the service plan are potentially better alternatives to meet the need that can be done safely. So the stair lift, and the judge kind of did look at the stair lift as making the home safer rather than kind of access to the bedroom because it was already an existing lift. So having the stair lift as a backup and not having the son dragged upstairs in a duvet, I think you can fairly objectively say that will make the home safer. But because there is an alternative solution that might be better, it's not necessarily necessary and appropriate to do, particularly in terms of just looking at making the home safer. So that application doesn't necessarily proceed on the basis of it not being necessary and appropriate. So I hope that gives you a bit more of an overview on how you can use that new kind of tool and decision-making framework to make better decisions around some of the more kind of complex DFG applications that you might see. And if you go to the DFG decisions guide on our website, we've published a decision-making tool where you can see all the details of that. That decision framework I just shared with you in a handy format that you could use for particular cases. Download that as a PDF and test it out for any new case you come up with. Really be interested to hear how that works for you and get some feedback on how you're finding it on particular cases. So yeah, please do go and download that, and we'd love to hear what you think of it.